are back at long last. The Constitution line by line. Here we are, coming
Finally.
to the end of Article 1, Section 8.
The longest section of the longest article of the Constitution.
That's right.
This is Clause 18. All right, Paul.
All right, Don. By the way, Paul Fabrizio,
Don Frazier.
McMurray University. Congress shall have the power, here we go, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or office thereof.
So let's break this down, because this is the one that has gotten us into a few imbroglios
Very good.
during the course of American history. The elastic clause.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm holding in my hands a rubber band. You know, it's an elastic piece of elastic. And what we have here, it's called the necessary and proper clause.
Yeah.
But more properly to understand it, you simply need some elastic. It stretches, it expands, it does what is necessary to fulfill the needs of the national government.
Well, and specifically it says the powers that we just listed, but also any powers vested in the federal government,
Its department.
its departments, or I forget what the last part is, but it's anything the federal government touches
Or office thereof.
or office thereof.
Yeah.
So all you have to do in order to stretch that elastic is create a different department and just keep rolling it forward. And then whatever that department does is covered by this necessary and proper clause.
Right. You think about what we have been through. In Section 8, it's the most important, I would argue, in terms of the Constitution, in terms of what the government does. And we've talked about the government's power to tax, government's power to go into debt, government's power to create roads, have a post office, and then focus in on the military and the various aspects of the military, have patents, copyrights. But then there is this last thing. The Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. This is giving the federal government amazing powers.
To create the mechanisms to bring about those enumerated powers.
Right. So if you have the power to build a navy, that under the necessary and proper clause, that gives you the power to have a draft.
I guess it does.
Yeah, you've got to
Or to build an army. How are you going to build an army if you can't get the reluctance into the ranks?
Yeah, you draft them.
Interesting.
This is, this gives Congress the hands to carry out what it wants to do. And because of the last part, any department or any office, it just extends the federal government further and further and further.
So what if Congress needed to restrict freedom of speech in order to bring about one of their enumerated powers? Does this elastic clause give them the ability to do that?
Well, it would, except that it would run afoul of the First Amendment to the Constitution.
But I'm begging an argument that we're going to have later on about whether or not we even needed the Bill of Rights.
Right, and we'll get to all that.
Yeah, correct.
But the simple reality is we do have a Bill of Rights, so therefore it always has to be taken into consideration, and that serves as a limit on Congress. Congress shall make no law.
Correct.
In the First Amendment.
And that's why we have them.
Right.
Because of this thing.
Because of this thing. I mean, here in Texas, we hear so much about state power and states' rights.
And state prerogative, yes.
And yet, when I look at the Constitution, I see the federal government as the one with all this power.
Correct.
And on top of having the power that's already listed, it has the necessary and proper powers to expand the enumerated powers to go beyond, and so this little elastic
Well,
thing
to expand them or
is,
just to interpret them broadly?
either way.
Well, how does it
What's the
say?
difference?
How does it say that? Well, okay, what is the difference?
Yeah.
But I mean, they don't have the enumerated power. Well, that'd be a tough one to. It's tough to think about, of all the ones that we've listed so far, how you couldn't take one and then expand it necessarily and properly to incorporate a bunch of stuff that didn't matter. Let me give you an example.
Please.
All right, we have the ability to raise an army. Well, the army has to be fed. So therefore, we're going to pass legislation controlling the agricultural economy so it works very efficiently to feed the army that the Congress is authorized to raise by one of the enumerated powers.
Okay. I won't disagree with you, but
Yeah.
I would use a different section of Article 1, Section 8
Okay, well,
to regulate the agriculture.
Okay.
Interstate commerce.
Well, interstate commerce
Clause
is
3.
Yeah, sure.
To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. And Congress now has the power to use all necessary and proper powers to make all laws which are necessary and proper. So what's the limit on Congress then? If they can regulate commerce, and now they can make any laws necessary and proper to carry out that regulatory
Their interpretation of that
Their
regulation.
interpretation can go on and on and on. So the military can draft people. Congress can regulate our economy. What kind of government do we have here?
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
I think the framers stuck a little, pin in the side of the states here. A little, not a pin, a knife
Yeah.
in the sides of the states, and said, look, the power lies with us.
Yeah. Don't be knuckleheads.
Yeah. Yeah, because we can go after you guys.
Yeah, we can raise 75,000 troops to suppress a rebellion.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was the war between the states.
What do you mean?
Well, a lot of times there's conflict over what to call the Civil War.
Right.
Well, what to call it even. I mean, Lincoln called it the rebellion.
Right.
Most Southerners refer to it as the war between the states, and they're castigated for doing so by people that think that that's implying something other than what they think it should imply. And the only person that really called it a civil war was Robert E. Lee. Yet that's the name that stuck.
Right.
And the reason that name stuck, I would argue, is because of his rehabilitation after the Civil War. And it just was a handier handle, as opposed to the War of the Rebellion, which is a contemporary name for it, or the War between the states, which is a slightly less contemporary name, but still pretty important. But that kind of lays out an argument for how come it played out the way it did.
Yeah. And even the concept of the war between the states, I think it'd be more correct to say the war between some states and a federal government.
Yeah, except the federal government employed other states
Right.
against the other
Right,
states.
and I see that, but I think to get at the concept here in the Constitution, and this may be an interpretation of it, we have a federal government that has the ability, has the Constitution behind it, the words
Yeah,
behind
the elasticity of it.
to go and go and grow and grow and expand. And then the states really want to fight that, but really aren't lacking the constitutional basis for it.
Yeah, they're kind of at the mercy of especially this particular clause.
Right. And, you and I hear all the time people talking about states' rights, but so far it's hard to find it in this Constitution. We will find it later on when we get to the 10th Amendment.
10th Amendment, yeah.
But that's nothing like what I think was listed here. I mean, in terms of the power that's given,
So
plus the elasticness of additional powers that are given to the government.
This isn't a cast-off
No
clause. This was
no.
in order to pin them down, because left to their own devices, sometimes states would go rogue.
Yes. And you wonder why some of the states approve this Constitution with that in there. You know? And there's,
may have been how come they were so adamant about a
Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights.
Yeah, that included a 10th Amendment.
Correct.
Yeah, so this, when I read the Constitution, I just see federal power, federal power, federal power, so much more than I see state power.
Wow.
And,
yeah, well,
it's
the nature of the document.
Yeah, and I am not a native of the South, but I've lived here for the last 30 years.
Sure.
And so I've learned to see state power. But again, then I read the document, the Constitution, and it's much harder to find it in the actual words of the document.
So those state powers are tentative.
You better believe it. At least in my interpretation of it.
Yeah.
I really see a federal government that the framers created that allows that government to become bigger and more powerful as it wants to over time.
As it deems necessary and proper.
Yes, and therefore, thank God for the Bill of Rights, which we'll get to later, because they're so necessary. And I could see the argument why we need them in the Constitution. They're so necessary because the government is so powerful. It can be so powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I deal a lot with the idea of strict construction or loose construction of the Constitution. And strict constructionists believe the Bill of Rights were probably unnecessary because there were so many limiting factors to the power of the federal government. But that last clause kind of leaves the door open for a lot of mischief.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we are talking politicians, and Mischief is their middle name.
Is their middle name. Interesting. Anything else?
No, it's just...
we're ending this with a bang.
Yeah, you have to read this as a cautionary tale. If you believe that there are limits on government power, you have to read the words of the Constitution as like, oh, we need to be careful with this government.
Yeah.
We really need to have civilian control over our politicians, over our military, because this government can, if it wants to, be very powerful.
Maybe that's why we shouldn't have done the 17th Amendment. So that way the states would still have some sort of bridgehead, some sort of beachhead within Congress.
We'll get to that later.
Yeah, okay. We'll have that conversation in the future.
Yes. Okay, but that concludes Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
The biggie.
It's going to get easier from here on.
It's going to get easier.
Sure.
Yay, that's awesome. All right, so that's our line. And
that's our line.
Pick it up with
Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution.
Section 9?
Section 9.
Article 1, Section 9. How many sections are in Article 1?
I believe there's 10.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting close.
Yeah, there's 10 sections. 10 are sections.
Yeah, 10 sections in Article 1. Okay, so we're doing well. All right, we'll be back in the next episode with new ground to cover.